Are the Vikings the 2022 Jaguars? Habitual self-inflicted wounds, bonehead mistakes, uncanny turnovers, but a red-hot turnaround rally brewing underneath? Are the Bengals the 2022 Bengals starting 0-2 straight up, 0-2 ATS, and looking pretty pedestrian doing it? Are they going to bounce back, or is this time different? We're back, and we're searching for alpha in NFL Week 3. Let's hit the opening bell. It's 7:08 in Dime Square, New York City, Thursday, September 21st, NFL Week 3. This is Alphabets. I'm Deep Value Better with Throw the Damn Ball, Judah Fort Gang. Our plan of attack: run through some Week 2 scores from our drive quality model, review some upgrades and downgrades from our consensus market analyst rankings, and then run through the NFL Week 3 slate. So, how does that sound?
I'm so excited to be back. It's been a while. We had some bumps, but we now have, all clear for the rest of the season, I hope. Yeah. And we can get back to doing what we do best, analyzing the market and trying to make some money betting on football games.
Yep. A little bit of friction at the beginning of the season. Again, a lot of projects that we've been working on all off season. The off season just blew by, really running out of time. Really wanted to prioritize some other things on top of the podcast. And we had some business travel. I got sick. So it was a little bit of a rough start. But we're back in action now. Smooth sailing from here on out. I released a note, something I'll be doing weekly this year called Crybaby. Basically whining and crying about everything that went wrong in the previous week, and then highlighting some of the aspects that went right, of course, hopefully, and how we can improve on those mistakes that were made in the previous week, specifically from a live betting perspective. So in this week's inaugural note, I run through a lot of the live trades that I made this Sunday. We didn't have a game trade, and game trade will be a little bit different this season. We'll be actually doing a game trade tonight, Thursday, for the Thursday night football game. Me and Zach will be doing it. Again, it's a little bit different. It's only one game, so we kind of split the time trading that Thursday night game if there's opportunities. Try not to be too big of a degenerate and just creating tradable opportunities when they actually don't exist. But we'll also be talking about the Circa Millions contest, what our picks are going to be, and some other kind of conversation around whatever that current week's games are. So that's kind of our agenda for this week and moving forward. And actually, this episode, too, is a little bit of a hybrid of what we really want to be doing for the rest of the season. We're going to do shorter podcasts, probably do 2 a week, aiming to do one, that Sunday night kind of tilt episode where we kind of do first reactions, run through what happened, run through the drive quality scoreboard on that Sunday night when it's the freshest and everyone's feeling very emotional, looking for emotional support. We'll be there. That's the goal of that. And then later in the week, have another shorter episode specifically focused on whatever that next week's games are. So last season, we kind of mixed the two. Half the episode is based on looking backwards. The second half was looking forwards. And it ended up sometimes being 2 hours long, and I'd have to edit a bunch of stuff out. It would take forever. And so we're going to try to avoid that this season. So this is a unique episode since we're going to still be combining a little bit of those elements. But really kind of moving into the kind of next set of our kind of seasonal framework starting next week. So with this week, let's debut our drive quality app, total beta version, really just a way for us currently right now to internally be able to kind of organize our drive quality information, be able to pull it pretty quickly and share it on screen rather than creating static slides. This is going to be a little bit more dynamic, so that will be helpful. But anything that you wanted to kind of highlight first from week 2, Judah?
I mean, it's I guess a broad level point that in week 1 I was like kind of ready to jump on the train of like, oh, offenses are really bad. This actually might be sticky. There are a bunch of rookie quarterbacks who aren't particularly good. Glad to see Arjun in the chat. We're back. I love it. I was ready to say like the Andy Daltons of the world, the Gardner Minshews. They're not starting. We've got kind of like bad quarterbacks in Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. And I was just like making the general point that like with the exception of Trevor Lawrence, we don't really have a particularly great quarterback of the last 3 draft classes. And like we've talked about so many times about the importance of having a quarterback on a rookie contract and how good that is for team success. And then it was just like, okay, offenses are going to be bad. And then, week 2 comes and offenses are much better. And it was a good reminder to sort of just take a step back, kind of digest information, process change, in particular ways. And then there are a couple of teams, of course, that are going to stand out. I think the Bengals are one of them, as you led with, which I'm curious to hear kind of how you're approaching them. The Rams too, and I think it's actually a really interesting spot and one to attack live, which is that like I think the Rams are an interesting case of a team where I'm much more willing to kind of come off. I had a strong offseason prior that the Rams were not going to be particularly good. And I'm much more willing to kind of come off that prior because I know, and we've seen in the past, that Stafford and McVay, or even McVay and Jared Goff can kind of put together some offensive success. And I'm willing to kind of lean into that change. But that's the name of the game at this point of the season is kind of how do you react to change and how do you kind of balance that with your offseason priors? And that's a potential source of huge alpha. And I think the drive quality model really gets to that of just trying to cut through sort of the noise of final scores we have on screen, the Vikings and Eagles. I mean, the Vikings have been the best offensive team by our drive quality numbers. And I think that points to at least a fundamental truth about the way they are playing. And again, it might not sustain itself, but that is why we kind of build these tools to help us get a little bit closer to understanding these teams and trying to predict their performance in the future.
Yeah, because especially early in the season, there's going to be a bunch of noisy outcomes, noisy performance, noisy data. And so that can also lead to, potentially noisy outputs from even systematic models. Again, most models are trying to be built in a way to flesh out that noise. But again, early in the season, you want to still remain agile in your kind of theses on these teams. You don't want to stick to your guns too much so and be, stubborn and continue to lose money on a team halfway through the season because your priors just turned out to be flat out wrong. But at the same time, you don't want to abandon your priors too quickly just because it didn't work out necessarily in the first few weeks. I think maybe besides the Rams so far, Judah, would you say like there's a team out there where your preseason priors, you're flirting with like, maybe I was just wrong. And so right now, like, I don't know if I necessarily want to participate in getting any exposure to this team right now because I've lost conviction in my preseason priors on this team.
Yeah, I would say the Ravens. I was really, really wanting to sell them, especially offensively, and I still think I will sell their defense. But they've been pretty good. And I bet on the Texans live in week 1. I had the Bengals kind of pregame, and I'm willing to kind of, especially because I wanted to play them early with the new system and Todd Monken coming in, and I wasn't really sure how Lamar would be as a pocket passer. And the numbers certainly suggest this offense will be good. I'm not so sure about the defense, but I'm willing to kind of I was ready to like jump on board of like the Ravens are going to miss the playoffs. They'll be like a 7-10 team. I've cooled off a bit, and certainly our numbers support that.
Well, and also the division complexion looks different today than it does prior to the beginning of the season as well. Again, like injuries are starting to pile up across the NFL already, quite meaningful ones. And of course, the Chubb injury, very notable for the Browns. And I remember when I was watching that Browns-Steelers game, a lot of in the secondary were even starting to go down, and the Steelers defense certainly, or the Browns defense certainly being one of their kind of huge elements. We see from a EDP per drive perspective, looking at the defense, the Browns, by far one of the best defense in the NFL from an a defensive EDP per drive perspective. But again, everyone's going to have to start now dealing with a lot of these injuries. And then there's, of course, the Bengals that we talked about. Burrow still dealing with his calf injury. It appears there's questions on whether he's even going to play now in week 3. And I think that's a huge outstanding question right now is that that first 2 weeks of performance from the Bengals akin to the first 2 weeks of last year, where, hey, they just didn't look good. They underperformed. They started off slow. And last season, there were several people that jumped off any existing bandwagon of the Bengals last year, very quick to do so. And it's still, they didn't bounce back right away in week 3, like all of a sudden, oh, they're back. Oh, we were wrong. It took them a little bit, but hey, by week 8, week 9, and certainly by like week 10, 11, 12, everyone was then, Bengals the top 3 team. Is that still in their DNA this year?
Yeah, I think it's a very different situation. And even the defensive numbers we have here have not been particularly great. And I think that's revealing, especially because one of these games was against the Browns, who do not have a good offense by any stretch. I think there are 2 things that are different about this team. And again, they can turn it around. So I wouldn't necessarily be, sell. But number one, as the contracts of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, as those loom, the team on defense was kind of built around having a lot of really just quality players who they didn't have to pay that much because they were having, their 2 best players in Chase and Burrow on rookie deals. And a lot of those guys have now left. I'm thinking of like the Chidobe Uzes of the world. And kind of like when you're built on a strong link sort of team, and then those guys start to go down a bit, the weak links pop up more. And I think the Bengals defense, which graded out as a terrific unit, and I think Lou Anarumo is a great coordinator, but the defense is a little bit more skeptical. And I also think defense is going to matter more this year than in past years. The other part of this is like the Bengals are as boring schematically as could be. They play 11 personnel. We've had hesitations about Zach Taylor for years. That's not new. I think you can kind of overcome that when you have Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd for that matter. They're terrific players. But I think the league is starting to kind of catch up to that a bit. And we saw the Mike McDonald of the Ravens kind of have a recipe of stopping the Bengals. We saw this in week 18 of last year, and then again in the wild card. They put together a good performance against the Bills, but they've largely struggled outside of that. All of that kind of lends itself to like, okay, maybe there's some pessimism about the Bengals, and we haven't even talked about the fact that Joe Burrow is not healthy. And like he is a guy who uses his legs. I mean, I did some research about like what I call true scrambles, which are essentially anytime you start the process of scrambling, whether it's a pass, sack, or run. And like he gets a ton of production on these passes. And how many times have we seen Joe Burrow do that, like a little shoulder dip, throw on the run, find his guy? And if he doesn't have that mobility, especially with the offensive line troubles, the Bengals are in some serious trouble. But at the end of the day, all of this can change so quickly because if you have a really good quarterback and really good receivers in 2023, that's a recipe for success. So while there are, I think, a lot of kind of question marks that were not present last year, or other areas of the team can kind of mitigate the offensive question marks, those are definitely more present this year. And I'd be a little bit more bearish on the Bengals, especially considering the context of the AFC.
Yeah, we're looking at the market consensus rankings, again, across several different analyst power rankings. We're looking at PFF, ESPN, 33rd Team, Athletic, Warren Sharp, NBC Sports, CBS Sports, Yahoo, USA Today, NFL.com, and Inpredictable. So using a little bit of a mishmash of different approaches to try to get a broader aggregate view of how the broader kind of market of influencers are perceiving the strength and weaknesses of teams. We see the Bengals downgraded 3 spots this week. They were downgraded several spots last week, currently ranked 14th right now. PFF is a market high on the Bengals, still has them ranked as 6th. The Athletic has them ranked 22nd at a market low. But NBC Sports, CBS Sports also right there at 21. And again, these aren't necessarily sharp outlets. This is not the intention of like aggregating all of the sharpest outfits out there to get their sense of power rankings. We want to know how are generally the general market consensus, how are they viewing these types of teams? So that's why we have, again, a little bit of different platforms out there with different approaches and certainly different levels of sophistication when it comes to being sharp versus square. But we can see after week 2, again, the Jets being downgraded 7 spots, Vikings and Patriots down another 5 spots. Our Vikings down to 23. This is the thing that bothers me the most. So when we look at our drive quality scoreboard, something that we've been talking about and posting on Twitter about how the Vikings are 2-0. Vikings, of course, lost to the Bucs in week 1, 20-17. Our drive quality scoreboard, again, looking at who performed best on a drive-by-drive basis, whose underlying on-the-field performance is demonstrative, is demonstrable of sustainable success. And when we're looking at that, we're looking at the Vikings beating the Bucs by double digits. And then, of course, last week beating the Eagles 33-30. So from a drive quality perspective, we have them at 2-0. And as you mentioned, even from an EDP perspective, from an EDP per drive perspective, right there with the Dolphins as an elite offense. And we're looking at the market rankings, having them as almost a bottom 25 team. That's wild. I think it's going to continue to present opportunities to bet on the Vikings kind of moving forward. Anyone else from the kind of market perspective that you think is not being downgraded enough or, has been downgraded too much?
I mean, I would say the Bengals, depending on where you look. But the Vikings, I think the Bucs are too high also. Honestly, I think we're kind of seeing that. I don't think we've learned anything material about this team. Like, they recovered a bunch of fumbles in week 1 and then barely squeaked by the Bears. The Bears had a chance to win that game. It was 2017 with the ball in Justin Fields' hands with 3 minutes left. I don't see this as a particularly good team, and I think they're kind of being there was kind of this side angle from before the season of this team is not going to be particularly good. But, the roster is kind of talented and maybe that lends itself to they'll be mediocre. So the expectation was bad, 6.5 win total, bad. But they still have Mike Evans, they still have Chris Godwin, the defense can still be fine. And then after 2 games, it was almost okay, that narrative is actually the true narrative, as opposed to just saying these were kind of fluky games. They could have been determined very differently, and nothing's fundamentally changed about the Bucs. Great. Baker Mayfield is a totally capable player when you're playing, when he's playing with a clean pocket. And when you go against the pass rush of the Bears and the Vikings, sure, you're going to have clean pockets. Go up against the Eagles this week when you've got Jalen Carter, dominating in the interior, where your interior is horrible. It's a totally different story. And I think kind of as we start to see these games play out, we'll realize that these 2 games in which they won were fun, fully in the cards, and we've learned nothing about the team. No, at least nothing notable that is new information. We know Baker can put together good performances when he's playing from a clean pocket and when things are fine around him. But I don't think this is a particularly great team. The other one that does stand out is the Giants. Same idea, right? The Giants 40-0 loss to the Cowboys was a classic example to me of we've seen this game from the Giants before. We've seen, Danny Dimes crumble, and game script matters so much in the NFL, where if you have some fluky thing, I don't know, a blocked field goal for a touchdown and then a weird fluky interception that also gets returned for a touchdown, and all of a sudden you're down 17-0 or 21-0, whatever it was. And the game fundamentally changes. And this is kind of why we have something like drive quality and earn drive points. It's to cut through that noise, because that's not reproducible and sustainable. The way you play offense is very, very different when you're in a neutral script, or not even even when you're trailing, but when you're not trailing by such a huge margin, that is not as revealing about the fundamentals of the team and how they're going to play in the future. How reproducible is their success or their lack thereof? And I think the Giants, this was a classic game we had in the cards. And sure, the defense is not great, but if anything, what last week showed was okay, the offense. By the way, I don't think the Cardinals are as bad as everyone says they are, but the offense can put together some success. They're not going to be shut out. You don't score 30 points by accident in the NFL. I think tonight will be a really interesting test, but how much has really changed? How much do we really should we really be changing our opinions on the Giants, as if all of this wasn't already baked in to what we knew about the team coming in from the preseason? And that's more of a 18-20 team, not a 25 team. They're not that bad. They're way too. They're coached by Brian Dable, who is going to have a huge advantage relative to the rest of the league. They've been bad by the results, but none of this was outside of kind of our view of the distribution of possible outcomes for the Giants this year.
Yeah, and on this chart, we're looking at active points being defined as the collective sum of points that the team has either covered by or not covered by. And we can see the Giants at the bottom left there. So, getting their faces ripped off from a betting spreads perspective. A lot of that coming, of course, in that week 1 game. But again, looked poor in week 2 as well. We're a heavy favorite pick by Circa Survivor. We picked them -4.5 road favorite. They ended up squeaking the game out, again, having to score 20 plus points all in the second half. And maybe part of that does go together with, I agree with everything you're saying about the Giants. And I think potentially they get upgraded without Saquon Barkley, because they're not as focused on trying to force that element of their offensive game. And that's one of the reasons why tonight I kind of like Danny Dimes' potential rushing props, again, in an ugly game tonight versus the Niners. But elsewhere, from the market consensus power rankings, top 6 teams, the market seems pretty convicted that those top 6 teams are top 6 teams, so no change. Niners being number 1, Cowboys number 2, Eagles number 3, Chiefs number 4, Dolphins number 5, Bills number 6. And then to round out the top 10, you got the Ravens upgraded 3 spots to number 7, Jags, Lions 8, 9, and then the Saints sneaking in as a top 10 team, upgraded 5 spots this week after an average performance versus the Panthers on Monday Night Football. I know we liked the Saints. You liked the Saints coming into the season as well. Again, put in an average performance week 1 versus the Titans, which I warned about in the preseason that was likely going to materialize. But again, then even in week 2, even outside of that last stupid touchdown that the Saints allowed in that final drive, even still, they're just not clicking, at least at this moment. What are your thoughts? Because I know you were hotter on the Saints than many, and I know it was very division specific.
Yeah, I think,
but
no, I still think I am, and I think that even our draft quality score has this as one of the better offenses this week. I think the main issue I have with the Saints is that they run the ball too much for a team that has incredible weapons. And I've always been extremely high. And I don't know, I kind of was a bit of Rashid Shaheed because he's a little bit of a gadget type player, but it seems like he actually might be able to sustain his success. And the dude is absolutely amazing. Chris Olave, I have that great soundbite that I hope you can play again at the end of the season, talking about how I think he'll be in the same category of conversation as the Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hills of the world. The main issue is that they run the ball too much. And I think that was certainly the case against Tennessee. And I also think we're going to get these fluky games. Like, that's a product of having a Derek Carr type of quarterback. You're going to get these weird games with, the Ryan Tannehills of the world too. That's built into the cards. But I think honestly, and it comes to the caveat of, like, I think the Saints actually played decently well, and the narrative might be a little different if it's like, wow, this team covered by 7, if they didn't allow that garbage time touchdown. But I think the Panthers defense is legit, and I think that's like a Elijah Evero thing. If you look at, I talked about the Broncos for a second. The Broncos had a top 5 defense by our ADP last year and are dreadful so far this year. And I think that's very much a function of their losing their coordinator and bringing in Vance Joseph, who's not exactly built for the modern NFL defenses. He kind of just lays back and does his thing. Elijah Evero is like rotating safeties at one of the highest rates in the league. But I think that game says more about the Panthers than it does the Saints. And the Saints, the case is going to be they have a ton of talent on offense, and it's really a function of the same thing, which is coaching. But they run the ball too much, and their game management in the fourth quarter is just dreadful. And I mean, wonderful for the bets that they got aggressive late, but not taking any time off the clock. Not having Carolina use any of their timeouts up by 3, moving the ball well. It was certainly mind-boggling, and we saw this all of last season. We saw it with I remember getting a backdoor cover on a 56-yard field goal by Matt Gay because the Falcons the Saints threw a pass when they should have just run the ball. That would have ended the game. We saw this in the Tampa Bay game where they ended up losing, just brutal clock management. So I think the coaching is the biggest concern. But at the end of the day, there's a ton of talent on this offense, and I'm still pretty high on them. I think we'll see them continue to succeed, even if it's been a little bit of a rocky start.
Yeah, one of the last teams touch on before moving into week 3 is Washington. So NFC East, a division that we did not get a chance to do our preseason preview on, but a team that Judah and I both have kind of deep out of the money futures on. Washington winning the division. I think you have Washington win the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
With one of them, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the market, again, upgrading them, but still lukewarm on them. I think the market doesn't trust Washington quite yet. Still has them as a consensus ranked 20th. Market high is CBS at 8th. They're the only platform out there to rank Washington as a top 10 team. And then you still have ESPN, 33rd team, Warren Sharp, all USA Today still ranking this team as a bottom 23-24 team. So you're talking about a team that's going to have a top 6 NFL draft pick potentially next year. They're 2-0, and Sam Howell's done nothing, I feel like, but impress. He holds on to the ball too long. The offensive line isn't great. He takes a lot of sacks. He kind of exacerbates that weakness, but there's weapons to go around. I think the Bieniemy effect is certainly paying dividends. And again, this is still only he's basically a rookie. This is like his 3rd or 4th game. And I think he's certainly playing better than any current rookie that we're seeing this year.
Yeah.
I'm very bullish on Washington moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the defense has been a plus unit for a while now, and their defensive line is just ferocious, especially now that Chase Young is back. And Montez Sweat is also seemingly really, really emerging. But I think the case with Howell is twofold. Number one, it's, as you said, it's all relative to the rest of the quarterbacks in the league. And I think Sam Howell 4 years ago wouldn't be as valuable as he is now. But the baseline play of quarterback is really, really low right now. And I think that gets back to the kind of the point about how we haven't really had any good quarterbacks of the last 3 draft classes. Think about, the Trey Lances, Zach Wilsons, and Kenny Pickett is coming eerily close to that category. Not even having just like a late round quarterback, with the exception of Brock Purdy, kind of emerge out of that class. So relative to the rest of the quarterbacks, he's very good. That's one point. And the second is, yes, Sam Howell takes way too many sacks, and that's a huge issue. But that is the trade-off of standing in the pocket for a while and also being able to deliver 30-yard strikes to Terry McLaurin in a closing pocket because he's not afraid to kind of take that hit or hold the ball on for an extra second. I think you have to view those two as a trade-off between each other, which is like, yes, they're going to be sacks, but they're also going to be huge explosive plays and throws that other quarterbacks won't make or can't make that might have more upside. And there's going to be some variance because, some games you're going to have 6 sacks, and then another game, those 6 sacks will turn into 3 sacks, and they'll instead be 3 20-yard completions, or, 2 20-yard completions and 1 incompletion or an interception, or whatever it is. But there's a ton of variance. But the key, and this is what I was saying the entire offseason, which is like, there is a right tail, though. There's a really fat right tail because Sam Howell can make throws that only the best quarterbacks can make. You don't accidentally throw that 30-yard touchdown to Terry McLaurin through 2 guys in a congested pocket. That's an incredible throw that we've seen him make for years now, whether it's in college or the preseason. I know Joe has been, beating the Sam Howell horse for a while. And it's kind of picking up these pieces. And
pretty much every 5 minutes now.
Every 5 minutes. It's picking up these pieces and saying, like, okay, can we get a little more of this as he develops and as he grows? We haven't seen CJ Stroud or Bryce Young make any of these types of throws. It's all projection on like how they play or some statistic, or there's nothing that particularly pops out about those guys, as opposed to Howell, where it's like he has his flaws, certainly, but he also has huge upside because he has a trait. That's a better way of framing it. He has a trait that most other quarterbacks don't have, and that's a very, very valuable one, and that's the ability to kind of work in congested pockets and throw the ball very deep and accurately downfield. That's a rare trait. If you can get all of the rest a little bit better, it kind of elevates that one singular trait that he has that provides huge upside for Washington. And you put that in the context of the NFL, you put it in the context of the NFC, and it becomes a little more appealing.
And you talk about variance. Variance means opportunity to make money, to make outsized profits, especially when you have that sort of kind of risk reward profile for a specific team. And it really came out really in spades in week 1 and week 2, even more so in week 2. But I know in week 1, I know you were betting live Washington at a discount to come back versus Arizona. And then last week, one of the things I was writing about in my crybaby note was how I got Washington plus 1,000, plus 400, plus 10.5, plus 7.5, plus 3.5, all on this kind of downswing in that first half. But because they have that DNA to be able to make those sorts of comebacks and dig themselves out of those holes. And it played even better because obviously the opponent they were playing had the exact same kind of inverse profile of very susceptible to giving up big leads and not being able to sustain long, consistent scoring drives. So that setup was just beautiful. But I think there's going to continue to be those types of opportunities with the team, specifically like Washington.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And the last thing I'll say on that is just that's precisely in why this trade is so valuable, is because if you can deliver throws, especially downfield, when the defense knows it's coming and you can have success, right? That's extremely valuable because in that situation, you can be sort of game script agnostic, where if a different quarterback who can't throw as well is down 21-0, you're toast. The game's over. Because you don't have that quarterback with the ability to succeed even when the defense knows that you're passing. So that's also a huge sign of growth from Howell. And it comes with the caveat of I did buy, some deep alts and deep SGPs of Sam Howell last week. I had a Sam Howell 300 and Washington minus 5.5 at 55-1. Which, of course, Sam Howell finished with 299 yards and the Hail Mary. I'm just glad I didn't have to watch that. I was offline on Sunday, but that was, if you want to talk about a crybaby moment there, I'm sure I would have been on full tilt if I was watching that entire thing unfold.
It's funny because, again, I had waterfall profits in that Washington-Denver game, and I almost made even more, as I had mentioned to you, like right before that last drive by Denver was live plus 7.5, like plus 790. Essentially just saying that they're not going to score any points in the last kind of 2 minutes of the game. And I already had basically locked in so many profits in that game already. I mean, I made probably like close to over $1,000 in that game. I was going to throw another $100 on that. I was like, I could see some like stupid bullshit happening, like 8-1 odds, like sure, whatever, I'm up. And I just missed it by like half a second. It froze and I wasn't able to execute it, but man, that would have been extra sweet. One of the things that Darnell had mentioned in the chat, looking for Bills' first drive score to get some good Kami numbers this weekend. And that can kind of bridge us into week 3. Thinking about Bills, Washington's opening at home, plus 6.5, a little bit juice, plus 215 on the money line. And this kind of brings us to a team that we haven't really talked much about is the Bills. The Bills still being ranked, again, from a market perspective, as a top 6 team. Did not look good week 1. Bounced back in week 2. But a lot of things what I'm hearing across the board is like, oh, it was just so obvious that the Bills were going to bounce back in week 2. No one was nervous. No one was nervous about Josh Allen and the Bills. There was pressure on that line on the Raiders all week. And then live. One of the things I talked about in the Crybaby Note as well is I got the Bills minus 1.5 about 6 minutes into that game after the Raiders went down the field, scored a touchdown. The next Bills drive, they go like 3 and out or something like that and punt. And now all of a sudden the game is at pick'em. So what everyone is telling me that, and I know not everyone's alive better, but if they were, then that must have been free money then. Like, just pile into that one then, because the Bills are obviously going to come back and torch the Raiders. But no, even in game, even 15% into week 2, there was still doubts and questions around, oh, how good is this Bills team? Maybe they're not going to be good. Maybe this is like a carryover from week 1. And we did have questions about, the Bills and this offense, and they had shown like hitting some speed bumps at the end of last year. And even when I go back and look at, look at their drives from last week versus the Raiders, one of the things we have on the drive quality scoreboard is we count the amount of third downs that they get on a particular drive to help give us a sense of, again, how fluid, sustainable, and reproducible that drive was. That's how we help grade some of the points that they earn on a drive-by-drive basis. And the Bills were just racking up. In fact, one of the things I don't have on here is fourth downs. And the Bills were constantly running into third downs, fourth downs in order to convert some of those points into scores. And that's why when you even look at our drive quality scoreboard, you see the Bills 27 to the Raiders 13. The game is closer from an EDP perspective than the actual final score. Not necessarily saying that the Raiders really outperformed, but that the Bills underperformed a little bit there because some of those drives were not the best drives. In fact, there were several drives where it came down to fourth down inside the red zone. They go for it and they get it, and then they convert it into a touchdown. Again, just 2 of those go sideways. This game could potentially be a lot different. And for that reason, I think there's still cracks in the Bills. And for that reason, like Darnell, I will again be looking for an opportunity to get the commies again, especially plus double digits in this game.
Yeah. I obviously love that spot, but it's interesting that you live because if we were on stream, I'm about to you, I'm ready to bet the Bills. Because I actually am a Raiders that game. But I think that they're going very matchup dependent this year. And they're not kind of the wagon of the first half of last year. This is the which cannot generate quick pressure. This has been the issue since Von Miller went out last year, which I think is going to really hurt them against quality offenses. And Josh Allen has had this weird turnover-prone thing going on. I'm not exactly sure.
Uh-oh. Lost Judah.
I was in the middle of a good thought there. I was in the
know.
middle of a great thought. That's tough. I'm not sure where I lost you guys, but I was just saying I'm skeptical of the Bills. I think there are some legitimate question marks from the second half of last season. I don't even care about the Week 1 Jets game. That was a weird fluke, whatever. But there's legitimate question marks about Josh Allen and the turnover-prone nature of the. He's going to make too many mistakes. This has always been the case with him. We've got 5 years of data with this, and they really lack secondary weapons. I mean, Dalton Kincaid could turn into a great player, but rookie tight ends historically are just not that successful, and he hasn't exactly emerged as this, different weapon where he'll have a historic rookie season. That's not happening. They lack secondary weapons, which I think will really come to kind of hurt them against defenses that can actually match up against them. They will take care of teams like the Raiders, and they'll still explode. And Josh Allen's so explosive that they can put up these huge performances. But I think they're going to be very matchup specific this year. They're going to struggle against defenses who can cover Stephon Diggs. And on defense that can't generate quick pressure. This has been an issue since Von Miller went down. There are massive question marks. I don't think they're the wagon that they were. If you asked me week 2 last year, week 6 last year, I've been like, Bills are the best team in the league. And I think we're very, very far from that. And it's actually a lot closer to kind of that like 6 to 10 range, but also not the dominant 6, where they can lose to a 23 team. They can lose to a Washington. I think that's
they're not an auto bet when they're down by 10 points.
They're not an auto bet. There are some serious question marks about this team, as there are for basically every team in the NFL. I think the Chiefs are almost the only exception. I would need a large sample of them failing to kind of back off. You're always skeptical of the Chiefs. You think it's the nice take to be skeptical of the Chiefs, and then
although I liked the Chiefs this week, and you were skeptical of the Chiefs.
I was skeptical. I was more optimistic about the Jags.
You actually were right though. I mean that was obviously a very bad performance by the Chiefs, and that was like an ugly game. A game that people thought were going to be the highest scoring game of the week was the lowest scoring game of the week. And I think that's another good transition, thinking about what teams are auto bets, especially live. The Chiefs have always been that team. And then one of the things I lamented in my crybaby note this week was I was piling so far into the live total collapsing, expecting, there to be a bounce back in the game, that I had so much exposure on that element of the game that I did not allocate nearly as much as I otherwise would have on the Chiefs at basically even money, which is like kind of where they bottomed out at. I got like 1 unit on the Chiefs in that game. And then I had about 8 scattered across different totals bets, all of which lost. And so that was like my biggest loser game. In fact, it really was like the only game that I lost money on. Again, this weekend actually there really wasn't too much to cry about, but I will always find an opportunity to cry about something.
That's certainly true. I feel like I just have like a visual kind of implanted in my memory of you just like, God, or just, making some face
the totals.
Like
when the totals like it never goes the right way, and maybe you get into a bet, like it really, any trade, but you get into a trade a little bit early and you keep buying it as it keeps going against you, and it just never bounces. It just feels like you're drowning for 3 hours. Even though I was making money on other things, my kind of single biggest bet on any one single theme was that theme, and it just never turned. And so it always like left me feeling icky by the end of the day, even though by the end of the day I was up 20 plus units. But so are the Chiefs still though in auto bets? You're looking at a team that played the Jags. One of the things I keep hearing about is, man, the Jags defense played well. The Jags defense might be a little bit tough. The Jags defense sucks. The Lions defense sucks. And the Chiefs could not move the ball on either of those defenses. Now, it was in Jacksonville. It was like 125 degrees, like on the field. So maybe there's that asterisk that played into both those teams playing bad. But even outside of that, we've seen now back to back, even when the Chiefs had their lulls in the past, is not been this bad from an offensive perspective. I mean, it looks like they're playing with their like feet in concrete.
I think they're just readjusting to kind of like not relying on Kelsey and kind of mixing in and learning who the receivers they want to rely upon are. They just have such a long track record of dominance that I need to see a lot more. By week 8 or week 6, if we're like this, like maybe I'll come off that.
What if the Chiefs score less than 20 versus the Bears this week?
That would be a huge red flag.
Okay, so it could happen this week.
That'd be a huge red flag.
Yeah. But there's already yellow flags. You have to admit there's yellow flags.
Time out. It's all about I'm not there yet. I think if the Chiefs score 20, here's how I envision this going. The market goes, oh, like we got to change everything we know about the Chiefs, and like that to me is going to be a hammer spot in week 4. Because I always want to be slower to downgrade the Chiefs in the market. That's all my point is.
That's fair. No, that's
yeah. I'm not gonna like. It would be a red flag, but I'm not gonna come off my take of like I want to whatever the market says about the Chiefs. I always want to be more bullish on them. And that doesn't mean buying in every case. It doesn't mean I'm betting the spread every week. But in cases like a live spot, which plays to their success, or if they're gonna really downgrade the team, that's when I buy. That's the whole take.
So, and what about this very nasty, ugly spot this week versus the Bears, 13.5?
Yeah, I'm not touching it. There are a lot of. It's a very weak slate for me of pregame stuff. I mean, I think live will be an interesting look. I'll tease a little. I'm not betting KC Chicago. Chicago seems like a disaster. The Chiefs have a tough time covering big spreads. That I'm not dying to bet a Chiefs minus 12.5. Maybe we can get a little bit of like scripted Chicago touchdowns, and like if we get it at
I mean, the sentiment is so bad on Chicago right now.
Yeah, it's dreadful. I mean, it's the organization's a bit of a train wreck, but I'm not betting anything there. There may be a couple.
Well, and one of the things actually I wanted to bring out was what you talked about last year for the Bears is when the catalyst for the Bears offense to actually start to raise people's eyebrows was after that Patriots game. That's when Fields started running more. And we haven't seen that the first 2 weeks. Again, he hasn't been running. And, now he's shooting his mouth off, which leans to an implication that maybe he's going to start running more.
And certainly what he's saying would suggest that he is not scrambling and he wants to start scrambling. I think that's kind of the read between the lines of all this coach speak, whatever narrative this stuff is all about. But I think they've had 3 design rushes in the past 2 weeks. They were at like 6 to 10 by kind of that second half of last year when they were having success. That I would not be shocked if they start designing some Fields runs, if this offense kind of turns it around. And I think the reason I was on the Bears last week was because like their offense has been good. Actually, maybe not good. They've been like average, kind of that like 14 to 18 range when they have Fields actually running and utilizing his legs. I think that's going to be pretty sticky, but it comes with the baked-in assumption of like, oh, they're going to play a certain style of football. And I don't want to necessarily back that until we actually see it. A great live spot, though.
Yep. And again, like, I think, it's not that the Bears offense is good, but I think it's not as bad as warranted by broader market perception. And, again, this is what the drive quality scoreboard and drive quality models intended to do is what we want to say is, oh, well, the Bears didn't lose to the Bucs as bad as the final score suggested. Well, this is exactly, we're quantifying that right here. So like basically the Bears lost by a field goal versus the Bucs when we look at it from an earned drive points perspective, in which that I feel like lines up even with the eye test, because I mean, they were down 3 with the ball after having already went down the field the previous drive, 90 yards with 3 explosive plays, 58 air yards, 34 rush yards, a nice mix, and had a touchdown, 5.6 EDP drive. Mwah. Beautiful. Then they stopped the Bucs. get the ball back. They're down by 3. That's a pretty decent setup to potentially go down the field. Now, of course, Fields is an idiot and, throws a pick, inside their own 10 that's returned for a touchdown and extends it to a 10-point. Like, come on, like the game was closer than the 10 points. So, and again, and our drive quality says it. So nonetheless, it's still very difficult to bet on the Bears. I didn't want to bet on the Bears this week. Very, very difficult. And I didn't. For my own account, I did not bet on any Bears.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Justin Fields rush yards 49.5.
So
I wouldn't mind leaning into some of those deep alts.
I want to see the up
79.5.
Yeah.
Go for 80 yards. I think he tries to force the issue potentially in this game. Doesn't mean that the Bears don't get their, brains blown out, but I think Justin Fields potentially gets his rush yards. Any other games that you want to talk about next week? We don't necessarily need to run through all of these.
Yeah. I was gonna say a couple of angles I'm looking at. I'm gonna get a little exotic, I think, with my Kingdom parlay this week, just because I don't love a lot. I mean, we talked about the Commanders and Bills. I can't believe I just called them the Commanders. We talked about the Commies and the Bills. I think we could see an interesting game script where the Lions' run defense has actually been terrific so far this season. It's also been absolutely dreadful at stopping quarterback runs. I could very much see a kind of like Desmond Ridder, like 40 rushing yards built in with a Lions like minus 9.5 type thing. If you can get that like 10-1, 12-1, I can see the Lions kind of playing from a lead. We haven't seen the Falcons playing from. I mean, they were behind, I guess, in the second half against Green Bay, but in a pass-heavy game script where these defenses clogging the lanes, and I think they lean on Ridder's legs in that situation. I think the Browns Titans might be one of the ugliest games I can think of, but the Browns defense, especially if they end up with Zardarius Smith healthy, and perhaps Greg Newsome as well, that would also be helpful. But I think Ryan Tannehill is a particularly sensitive quarterback to the situation that he finds himself in, and there's a huge mismatch on the defensive line of the Browns versus the Titans offensive line. I could see that as like building some like same game parlays of like unders, sacks, that sort of thing. I think that we're going quick hitters here. I think that the Chargers and Vikings.
I really like the Desmond Ridder angle, first of all, in the Falcons one.
Yeah, that's one.
So he ran the most last week than he did collectively through the last like 3 games that he had played.
Yeah.
And it's a 14.5 right now. So yeah, boosting that out. If he gets potentially like that 30, 40 yards, I think that's definitely attractive.
Yeah. It's also, I don't think like he can run. That's certainly in college. That was the thing. The market has no way to price a game in which the Falcons haven't been able to run the ball efficiently. And if like we see more dropbacks from Ridder, that's going to mean more rushes. They also gave him a couple design runs last week, which I think we'll start to see getting more involved in the offense. It's a weak spot for pregame betting. I love the Eagles. That's my favorite play. We will be playing that in circa 100%. Complete class difference between who the Bucs have been playing, and like the Eagles might be a fringe, tier 1, tier 2. They have some question marks, but they're way better than the Bucs. And I want to kind of be fading the little bit of the selling of the Eagles and certainly the buying of the Bucs, as we talked about. But the rest all set up for live spots for me. There's not really much I love, and I'm not going to force the issue here. I think the Broncos and Dolphins is going to be a really compelling game. I'm a little bit, I was very, very, very bearish on the Broncos. Again, I'm a little bit. It's the same kind of thesis with the Rams, which is like I'm willing to bail on my priors a little bit more when we're talking about a Sean Payton. Like maybe he has something, and they show up extremely high in our ADP numbers, and that could very well be a function of like some random 2-game sample, and they played the Raiders and this, and they haven't had so many drives. But I think there are better spots to kind of fade certain teams, and I want to get a little more information. I'd rather bet that live than before the game.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of true of most of these spots. I'm like, I'll hold my nose and bet the Cardinals. Like I would, there's value on the 12.5. I think the Cardinals are like, we haven't gotten off the like, oh, this team is really, really bad. But I think they've like played competitive games. They don't have that tank variable that everyone just assumes they have. And all organizational points lead to like the Cardinals are not tanking. Everyone's like, oh, why do they get rid of Colt McCoy and Josh Jobs? Like, Colt McCoy's a tank job. Like that's not anything. Kyler Murray has every incentive to come back. We've talked about this in the past. They're certainly playing hard. The team that the market has as 32nd is almost never as bad as the market says. I think the Cowboys are going to be boosted because they've absolutely dominated the Jets and the Giants. But as we've talked about, that Giants game is kind of a little like this is all in the cards. They beat the Colts 54-13 last year. We've seen this happen before. How much do we really know about the Cowboys? Is it that much different? Are they really the second best team in the NFL now? I don't think so. So that's like a hold the nose.
There's no evidence to suggest that they are.
No, there's no real evidence.
No.
If anything, our drive quality stuff says that they're a little bit fraudulent.
Yeah, mediocre.
I'm not gonna fully buy in and be like, through 2 weeks, the drive quality is the truth. But it does point to a little bit of a sell signal, at least relative to market expectation. That I might hold my nose because 12.5 is a huge spread, and it's kind of baking in the fact that like the Cowboys are the best team and the Cardinals are the worst. And I think that gap might not be so huge, but also points exist in a real game, and the Cowboys have a tendency to blow teams out. And even if there's kind of a value from a fundamentals perspective, if you're like creating point spread ratings, that doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to play out on the field. And backing the Cardinals is not something I'm interested in doing in the long run, No. Making these sorts of bets, even though I think there's value, and that could be a very interesting circle play, for instance.
I think also what you're referencing around the Broncos, scoring well from an offensive EDP perspective. Again, it's only through 2 games. It's actually only through a handful of drives. They have some of the fewest drives in all of the NFL. There's only 6 drives in week 1 versus the Raiders. And so right now, they're basically the 3rd best offense from an EDP perspective.
But I don't
you have to take that with an asterisk.
Yeah, for sure.
But what I think that is sufficient evidence of is this is no longer the offense that is going to struggle to score any touchdowns. And, that they're going to struggle to eclipse more than 15 points in a game. I think they're going to be able to score points. The thing is actually now that, I think we mentioned it even earlier, the defense is actually potentially maybe part of the Achilles heel, but I think the offense is still going to be vulnerable to going through like long droughts of not scoring. But I think the distinction between this year and last year is basically when you saw an inkling of like, this Denver offense can't move the ball, like it's hands off. Then this year, there might be opportunity to like buy that dip for Denver kind of intra game.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's actually a better way of framing kind of how I feel about the team. It's like in my head, I was just going to price this like same projection as what they were last year. Just this like team that would be very much in the bottom, at least very far to the left and on the x-axis of that graph. And now it's like, okay, I'm willing to accept that like they might end up closer to the middle or like maybe like 1 standard deviation kind of from that like mean, but not 4 as they were in the past. I love that. And I love how you're kind of using that as a live betting game plan.
I think one of the last games I want to hear your thoughts on too is Texans Jags. So I know Texans are dealing with like injuries as most teams are. Again, I don't think the Jags-Chiefs game was any signal around the Jacksonville defense being good. And again, the Jaguars through 2 weeks have shown no evidence that they're a more mature team than they were last year. Still putting themselves in like bad positions to not capitalize when you think that they otherwise should. Almost after every Jags game, it's, well, if this or if that or if this, then things would have been totally different and far better for them. I think one of the things I've been hearing a lot about this week, oh man, like the Jags, like Trevor Lawrence should have thrown for like 3 touchdowns, but every single time he threw for one, it was like barely out of bounds, or the guy juggled it, or he got hit, or whatever. Like this happens, and I think the 8.5 could be a little bit too wide.
Maybe again, there could be some sort of value there, but these are not. It's large enough that I'm not betting the Jags, but there could be some theoretical value there, and maybe it's a compelling circa pick. I'm not going to let you do that, but I still don't. You don't want to be leaning into teams where the Jaguars can very well put up 35, in which case the 9's irrelevant. Like, would that shock anyone? Of course not. Also, everyone's hurt, but not everyone has cluster injuries in the same way the Texans do on the offensive line. They can't run the ball. Like, I'm not relying on CJ Stroud in his 3rd game. And like, yes, the Jaguars are beatable, but they're not just like, you're not by virtue of playing the Jaguars going to automatically start to score 28 points. And I trust Trevor Lawrence I trust the coaching staff, and as much as we get the fuckery we always have of just those like painful plays, that's built in. They're too good fundamentally.
It's part of the
Trevor
risk
Lawrence
premium of betting on the Jags.
Yeah. And like what comes with that is generally actually going for the 4th downs as opposed to punting. And like, yeah, they might pitch it to, their backup running back on some bonehead play call, but like at least they actually got the basic thing right, which is actually putting themselves in a situation to succeed. And over time, I'm willing to still lean into the Jags. That's the thing. We should have learned this last year, which is we leaned into the Jags. We leaned into the Jags. It hurt us. And in the end, the Jags were certainly my most profitable team that I bet on. For sure.
I'm not abandoning our long-term Jags thesis. I'm just saying it would have been nice to see like definitive growth spurt from them this year.
It's early.
No, still early. I wish we would have been surprised to the upside.
Yeah, and look, that's why I didn't want to bet the Chiefs last week, and why I didn't want to take them in circa, was because I'm waiting for that Jags kind of like the coming out party of like, here we are every bit as good as every AFC team. Like, put us in the same conversation as you would the Bengals, Bills, and Chiefs, right? That tier that kind of goes together. But all that is to say, I'm not willing to take like, what have I seen from the Texans that I'm like, oh, I really, really want to bet the Texans this week.
Sure, that's fair.
Like that's not in the cards.
All right, that wraps up our first episode. Again, had a little bit of a clunky start to the year. Even this episode, again, still a little bit clunky, still getting the rhythm back, getting the show flow together, but we'll be back in rhythm starting next week. Again, thinking about having 2 mini shows a week and not one long one. So definitely feel free to give us feedback on how you like that relative to last year for those Sportfolio King OGs out there. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. In fact, Zach and I will actually be back online in the next like 30 minutes to trade the Giants Niners game. So for those who want to do that, we'll see you then. But otherwise, we'll see you next week. That's closing bet.